What's up, everybody? Thanks for checking into my YouTube channel. Pastor Matt here. Very glad to have you. Today we're gonna take a little bit of a side trail. Normally on this channel, of course, we talk Bible, we talk theology, we talk good books, philosophy, ideas. Today we're gonna go down the rabbit trail of culture. I'm concerned, if I'm completely honest. I'm concerned with a massive trend that we are seeing slowly creeping up in our society, but now recently taking a big jump. It's gone from 0 to 60, it seems, even in the last couple of months, and that is censorship of ideas within our society. The thesis of this video that I want to present to you is that censorship is actually hate speech. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, wait, Pastor Matt, you've got that exactly backwards. The purpose of censorship is to curtail hate speech. Censorship exists so that hate speech does not. But I'm not so sure that that's actually true. In fact, I'm growing increasingly concerned that censorship, you want to call it cancel culture, whatever else you want to describe it as, I'm becoming convinced that it itself is a form of hate speech. If you're new to this channel, my name is Matthew Everhart. I'm the pastor of Gospel Fellowship PCA. We're a Reformed Bible-believing church just north of Pittsburgh. If you're anywhere in the area of Butler, Cranberry, historic Saxonburg, you're in the right place. Come visit us at Gospel Fellowship PCA. Give us a Google or come check us out on the Lord's Day. And again, sorry for the deviation here. Normally theology and Bible stuff, but I'm just so concerned with what we're seeing. So let's go ahead and start off and try to define some of the terms that we're working with here today. So what is censorship? Well, in broad swath, censorship is the sanitization of ideas. It's the restriction of the free flow of ideas such that society itself comes to a concentric place of agreement. Now, that's not always a good thing, okay, because a diversity of ideas, a diversity of inputs, a panoply of contributions intellectually in a society is usually a very good thing, but censorship tries to restrict that and narrow it down to an ideal. Now, the way that it does this is by the removal of certain content. Now, in its most benign forms, of course, censorship has to do with things like removing books from libraries. If a book is not appropriate for the high school library, it may be removed. Sometimes people call that censorship. Sometimes it takes place in more nefarious ways than that. Sometimes a person's access to forms of communication is cut off. Imagine, for instance, if Amazon were to cease producing or selling certain books because of the worldview or the ideas of the author. That would be a form of censorship. In extreme forms in history, we've seen the burning of books and even the burning of people in the form of martyrdom. And so censorship is not necessarily a very an innocent thing. In fact, it could be very serious when it sets into the very fabric, the warp and woof of a particular culture. Now, hate speech is usually defined as derisive, derogatory, defamatory speech against a group of people. Now, notice the term group, and that's going to come back here as I try to defend my thesis that cancel culture and censorship is hate speech, because it's not considered hate speech if a person hates another individual. For instance, you might hate me. I don't know why you're watching. If you are, maybe I hate you. That's probably not true. I love most people. But when two individuals hate each other, society doesn't usually get involved. Where society has to get involved legally is when a verbal animosity, perhaps threats, perhaps vitriol, perhaps incitement of violence, when these things are usually considered against groups as a target, then we traditionally have some form of hate speech. So that could be presented against a particular race or a color of skin or an ethnic background. Could be to a political party. It could be a religious group. And normally when these things take place on scale, then we call that hate speech. We use the euphemism cancel culture today. But, you know, a euphemism is trying to describe things in nicer terms. Cancel culture really is, though, just a form of hate speech. And what cancel culture attempts to do is to publicly shame people because of the opinions that they hold. It's an attempt to destroy one's entire reputation, perhaps to destroy their employment or even their employability in the future. And that, of course, can be very detrimental. And so cancel culture is not just a simple thing that's done online on Twitter. No, cancel culture actually ruins people's lives, and it is an extreme form of hate speech. So generally, in terms of censorship, we're talking about the banishment of ideas. Now, bear with me here for just a moment, because most societies will not flourish with the restriction of ideas. The banishment of ideas is usually not a good thing. No society can thrive under such conditions. Think for a moment about a very healthy work culture. A good healthy work culture in terms of technology, or in terms of some sort of societal advancement, maybe literature, maybe arts, maybe theater, maybe film. Usually the best workplace scenario is when ideas are free flowing, when ideas are plentiful, when there's no fear of throwing out a new idea, even if it challenges the status quo. Because what happens with ideas is they tend to sift themselves out. The good ideas tend to work, and therefore they're utilitarian, they're functional, they're helpful, they're practical to society. And other ideas, because they're nonsense, or they're false, or they're demonstrably not true, these ideas tend to fall by the wayside. But usually a society flourishes when it has the most freedom of elaborative idea. And contrarily, we see this in history, whenever ideas are restricted or banished or narrowed or scaled down, those societies tend to implode on themselves eventually. So cancel culture operates under the 3 Ds. All right, and so let me just give them to you really quickly here. First of all, the D of deplatforming. Deplatforming takes place when a person is blocked from social media, or they are banned from the use of public forms of communication, or they are shadow banned. Shadow banning is this more subtle form of deplatforming. Let's say when YouTube intentionally removes a particular video from its algorithm, or maybe you're following somebody on Twitter, but they never show up in your feed mysteriously. Well, it's because Twitter is deranking or devaluing their content intentionally, because they perceive those ideas to be harmful or threatening or contrary. The second D is demonetization. This, in my view, can be very serious, because some people make their living through the disbursement of ideas. For instance, writers and preachers and speakers and playwrights and other people, other creative people, other idea sharers, their way that they support themselves is through the sharing of ideas, creative ideas, philosophical ideas, political ideas even. But demonetization takes place when their ability to make money off their intellectual content is removed from them. So that's a pretty serious thing, because that inhibits a person's ability to support themselves and their family. And then third, another form of cancel culture is what we call doxing. Now, even my wife didn't know this term. We were talking about this the other day. But doxing, D-O-X-I-N-G, is where a person intentionally posts somebody else's private information, let's say their residence or their phone number or their place of employment, to expose them to unnecessary risk. Now, this is a harmful thing. It's a shameful thing to do, and yet nevertheless, we see this is becoming increasingly popular. So if you don't like what somebody did, you throw it out there on Twitter, hey, it would be a shame if everybody showed up to such and such address on Main Street and really show that person what they think. Well, that's actually kind of an incitement to violence, isn't it? Because that person is intentionally broadcasting the suggestion that harm or violence or some sort of malevolence should take place to a person because of their ideas. Now, suppose here that somebody objects and say, no, wait a second here. Censorship, what it does is it simply curtails the extremes of society, just cuts off the extremes. Well, let me give you a couple of visuals here to think about this. So let's say you had an onion, right? And if censorship was only the removal of the most outer extreme, the strangest ideas, the furthest from the center, well, sure, maybe for 1 or 2 layers, but censorship doesn't usually have a way of slowing down once it's fully activated. A censorship instead continues to cut off whatever is the extreme until the very center or the very core itself is then being attacked or diminished in some way. Or picture yourself on a continuum, right? Just imagine a line, and let's say you're on the conservative side or the liberal side, and other people more extreme than you, and so of course it doesn't matter if these people are censored or their ability to communicate is cut off, because hey, you're closer to the center, right? But remember, every time you cut off the edges or the extremes, you come closer to the center by necessity. And so pretty soon you get into this dangerous scope where people are afraid to express their ideas freely. Now, again, some people will say, no, look, censorship actually is there to eliminate or to stifle hate speech. But I'm actually arguing the opposite, that censorship is a form of hate speech. And the reason is very simple, because it hates speech. And by hating speech, by being antagonistic towards certain kinds or expressions of speech, therefore it hates the speakers and it seeks to diminish or to devalue them. Now, of course, the big question in all of this is who is to judge? Who defines these things? Who has the right to say what is hateful, or what sorts of groups we can tolerate derisive speech against, and which kinds of groups of people do we not tolerate? Who is to judge? Well, it used to be a theoretical question, one that we would kind of banty about and kind of, we would consider and postulate, and, well, who has the right to judge? Well, now we know the answer. And the answer is, unfortunately, big tech. Big tech is the one who has asserted itself as having the right to curtail and to diminish certain kinds of speech and therefore certain kinds of speakers. Did you know, for instance, that Facebook has a Supreme Court? Yeah, I'm not talking about the Supreme Court. I'm not talking about Justice Roberts and Clarence Thomas, and I'm not talking about Amy Coney Barrett or Sotomayor or Kagan. No, Facebook itself has a Supreme Court. It's a group of people who determine which ideas are acceptable to the public and which are not. And the same thing with Google and Twitter and Instagram. Of course, they're owned by Facebook, but all of the big tech companies, Apple, they're putting together these morality panels in which they determine, for the sake of the company, which ideas are acceptable to the broader public and which are not. But the problem is, who elected these people? Who gave them the power? Who authorized them? Who verifies them to see whether or not they're even able to make such determinations? Is it even possible to make these sorts of determinations on scale? Now, of course, when we think of censorship, the greatest examples in recent days have been the former president of the United States. We've seen an entire company, Parler, essentially get banished, deplatformed. Their company, their founder doxed, his personal information given out. His family had to go into hiding. We've seen this now, demonetization of the My Pillow guy, his products being removed from stores. The Epoch Times is a newspaper that does a lot of exposés related to China and the CCP. They've been demonetized by YouTube. Live Action is a pro-life group. It's been demonetized, removed from Instagram. Abigail Schreier, Deborah So, these are authors who have written about the dangers of transgenderism. Get this, both of them have had major problems even getting their books to be sold on Amazon. In some cases, they're showing up damaged with covers torn intentionally. In some cases, not coming into stock at all, even though they've been reordered. Josh Hawley had his book contract revoked because of his views about some political events that we can't mention, lest I get deranked in this particular video. Can't even say the reason why. Otherwise, this video would be removed. So my question is, well, why is this hate speech? Well, here's the reason why I believe censorship qualifies as a form of hate speech, is because it attacks groups. Entire identity blocks, ethnic groups, political parties, religious affiliations. It's not the extreme random weirdo out there that's getting censored, but ideas, major ideas. And remember, ideas are incredibly significant for a society or culture to flourish. We need a plethora of ideas. Not only that, but the reason that I believe censorship is hate speech is because it depersonalizes people. It says your life, because you hold these views, is subject to ruin at our whim. Your life, your reputation, your ability to make money, your ability to do commerce should be ruined, and in some cases even lives endangered because of what you believe. Censorship says you as a human being cannot speak to us. You have no right to express your views or your values if in any way they challenge the consensus views, the acceptable views. Now this, my friends, right here, this is unfortunately the playbook. The book 1984, I've done a review of this book on my YouTube channel before. It's a fictional book, But this is the playbook that censorship has been following almost to detail. One of the ideas in this book is the idea of memory holing. In 1984, a memory hole is this vacuum, this void, kind of like when you go to the bank and you put your thing in the tube and it goes shoo, and it shoots away. But in this book, entire people, their reputations, events, history, they are tossed down the memory hole. They're sucked down into the abyss, and they're only ever brought up again if it's politically expedient. And now, of course, the danger is with big tech. Entire people, entire groups, entire ideas, entire philosophies, entire religious doctrines could be memory holed by the vast powers of big tech to do so. Now, of course, censorship really is intellectual cowardice, isn't it, if we're completely honest? Because censorship is the refusal to take on ideas at face value. Don't want to have the conversations. Don't want to take the time to refute them. Don't want to let the public do the hard work of weighing whether or not an argument is true or a certain assertion can be defended. It's intellectual cowardice because instead of having those conversations or giving our culture time to sift through the ideas, it simply cuts off what ideas are out there, and it essentially restricts the free flow of communication. Now, obviously, we don't go around censoring flat earthers. Flat earthing is false. The world is round. We've known that for hundreds of years now. But why don't we see flat earthers, easy for me to say, deplatformed and deranked? Well, because they're not a threat to the majority position. They're not a threat to those who are in power. And so there's some ideas, of course, that we just excuse as silly or harmless. They're benign. But the more an idea challenges the status quo, the more it's politically inexpedient to those who hold power, the more threat it is to be memory holed or to be challenged or to be cut off. A free speech society should be, in my view, something like a tournament of ideas. Now, you know what a tournament is in sports. You have 64 competitors. They all play each other. Now you're down to 32. They play each other. Now you're down to 16. Now you're down to 8, 4, 2, 1. A free speech society should be something like a tournament of ideas where the better ideas are continually weighed, measured, and they tend to flourish because they're better. This is why false science, this is why fake news, these things tend to fall out of the way and scatter by the wayside, and you don't need to intentionally censor them or cut them off because they eventually prove themselves to be untenable. A free speech society, though, has the opportunity to flourish with this plethora of idea input, and it's a cowardice. It's an intellectual place of fear to even refuse ideas to have access. Now, perhaps you're saying to yourself, well, Pastor Matt, you're kind of making a big deal about nothing here. I mean, so what if a few politicians get, kicked off of Twitter? Well, the problem is it's really hard to turn back this snowball once it starts to roll down the hill, isn't it? I mean, today it's your Twitter account, but what about tomorrow if it's your email? How would you like to have your emails sifted and sorted and weighed? How would you like to have your emails blocked if they don't support the primary viewpoints of the party with a capital P? How would you like to have your cloud information that you've stored eliminated or deleted? The nice thing about having things on your own hard drive was that you had control of it. Now, of course, if it got soaked by coffee or something, you lost it. And the cloud drive was a great way to back things up because it was just out there, presumably on some sorts of servers all over the place. But now, unfortunately, all your ideas, therefore, are accessed easily by the big tech companies and they can censor them. We've already seen a few instances during the pandemic where videos describing medical information related to the pandemic were deleted even from people's hard drives, even from people's Google Drives or their OneDrive. Things were eliminated and removed because they were not accessible. How about commerce? What happens when we remove people's ability to do commerce or to do banking or to get credit? All of these things are very frightening and, in my view, unfortunately, all too close to actually taking place. Now, I had a friend online who put something out there on Facebook the other day that it's probably a good time to buy books, to buy paperback or hardback books before too many ideas are memory hold. Entire philosophers, theologians, entire people from history are just memory hold forever. And at first I thought to myself, now that's kind of a crazy idea, isn't it? But the more I think about it, the more it's not such a crazy idea to buy books, physical books, hard copies of the books and ideas that are long lasting and have significant value. Because imagine if Amazon decides that it's going to cut off your ability to purchase or acquire certain types of information in the future. Do you think they might do that? Well, it was Amazon servers who removed Parler because of the perceived threat to our democracy. But there's no telling where this might go. And unfortunately, it's not going to be the random weirdo wingnut individual out there that gets censored. It's going to be major ideological groups, those that do not support the party, those that do not support the doctrine, those who have interesting ideas, free ideas, creative ideas, and that might be you. And in my view then, censorship is a form of hate speech because it intends to dehumanize you, to depersonalize you, and to tell you that your ideas are worthless to this society. Well, maybe I got it right in this video, maybe I got it wrong. Let me know what you think in the comments. By the way, 1984, post a link to that in the description of this video. Get it before you can't get it anymore. Who knows what might happen. Thanks for checking into this video. Do love you lots, and we'll talk to you later.